Hi everybody, welcome to the channel. This is Blue Liner Milsurps, all about military surplus firearms. My name is Scott. Please, if you enjoy this video, hit the like button. If you enjoy the content, why not subscribe and leave a comment or a question down below. I do my best to respond. This is going to be our next video in the Protectors of Neutrality Swiss rifle series. It's our third rifle in the series and our second rifle that deals with the Schmidt-Rubin straight pull series. So before we get into this video and this actual firearm, and in this video we're actually going to be covering two rifles in this one, because this is actually started out life as one rifle and then became another one. But to do that, we have to put it in context. So let's bring up the previous one, the original Schmidt-Rubin rifle, the model of 1889. I will put a link to the video that I did about this one down in the description. Make sure you watch that. If you recall, this rifle was adopted in 1889. It was developed by Lieutenant Colonel Rudolf Schmidt and Lieutenant Colonel Rubin, who developed the ammo for it. So in this model of 1889, the basics of it was actually designed for black powder. But they never actually used it with black powder because smokeless powder had been invented by the French. So they quickly went to a smokeless powder, and that would be the GP90 ammunition. I'll put a picture of that right up here. The GP90 was a smokeless powder, but it was a very low pressured smokeless powder that could go very well into this rifle. And the reason was, I'll open this up, and if you recall, it was because Colonel Schmidt put the locking lugs here at the bottom when he designed this. So we see here we have a camming action. That's why it's a straight pull with our up rod. And the locking lugs are down here at the bottom. And that is because it was designed for black powder rounds in mind, meaning that you want to keep that as far away from where the fouling is going to be with black powder rounds. Well, in the end, they did not use black powder with this. They redesigned things and they came up with the GP90, which was a smokeless powder round, but it was a lower pressured smokeless powder round. So the Swiss asked Colonel Schmidt if he would redesign this with the locking lugs from the bottom and move them up to the top of the camming piece here. Colonel Schmidt said no, he would not do it. He felt it was good enough. There was no need to do so. Shortly thereafter, he actually left the Swiss Armory at Bern, and some other engineers that were there decided to redesign this and move the locking lugs from the bottom up to the top. That would become the model of 1886. I'm sorry, 1896, which is this rifle before it was converted. So we'll go over that in a moment. So what you have to imagine is this rifle in this configuration, because when they came out with the 1896, it still had the 12 round magazine. It still had the magazine cutoff. It still had the old barrel and old sights and everything there. It just had a redesigned receiver and bolt that we'll go over in a minute. So keep that in mind, and now let's go over to where our 1896 is, as I get that out of the way. So here is our 1896/11. So the 1896 was obviously adopted in 1896 with the redesigned receiver and bolt. And let me pull the bolt out here so you can see. We have a redesigned bolt. The locking lugs are now here at the top, whereas in the previous 1889, it was down here. What this did was make the action a lot stronger, because what would happen is in 1911, the Swiss would adopt a new round that had much higher pressure. They needed those locking lugs to be further up in order to take the pressure. The new ammunition would not work in the 1889 with the locking lugs down here at the bottom. The action just wasn't strong enough. So when it was designed, we'll put these right next to each other, you could tell that not only did they move the locking lugs up, but they made the entire bolt just a little bit shorter and made it considerably stronger. So that's the basics of what happened. The locking lug got moved up, the inside of the receiver, as well as the bolt got redesigned. And with the locking lugs up here, and it was still shooting the GP90, and then in 1911, everything changed. And we'll go over that in just a moment. First, let's talk about Swiss military doctrine. The Swiss had a doctrine of what they called military militia army with conscription and reserve duty. It was based on age, and the Swiss during both World War I and World War II had high levels of conscription and what they called armed neutrality. So during World War I and World War II, the Swiss did mobilize and they watched their own borders, and they were not invaded in either war. The Swiss put a very, very high value on accuracy and marksmanship. That is what was the mainstay of the Swiss military doctrine. So soldiers would get conscripted. They would do 2 years in the army. They would be trained as best marksmen that they could, and then they would go into reserve duty. They would take the rifles, their equipment, they would go home, and there were 2 levels of reserves. The first level was the younger ones, and the second level, and older ones. There is a name for that. I'm not sure exactly what they are, but they would call those up and mobilize them during both world wars, and they were expected to show up with their rifles. Now, one of the other things that was really driving accuracy and marksmanship with the Swiss were their shooting clubs. So they would take these things home with them after their military service while they served in the reserves, and there were a lot of shooting clubs around Switzerland where they held all kinds of competitions and matches, and once again there was a very high premium put on accuracy and marksmanship, and that's one of the reasons that these rifles shoot so well and they are so accurate. And so once we understand the Swiss mindset of why these rifles are doing what they do so well, then you can understand the changes that are made over the years. So if you imagine this is actually an 1896 rifle with the upgraded bolt and everything, but originally it was in that 1889 configuration with a really big 12 round magazine and the older sights and an older barrel as well. So in 1911, the Swiss adopted a new round, and I actually have one of those rounds right here, and I'm going to pull it out. It's called the GP11. GP stands for Gewehr Patron, which is German for rifle cartridge, and this is it right here. This is actually military surplus from the Swiss themselves. They made these all the way through to the 1970s. This is actually a GP11, an actual GP11 Swiss surplus. So when they came up with this, and this is much better than the GP90, it had higher pressures, it was flatter shooting, it was much more accurate, and it had much better ballistics. So they went with that. So when they did that, and they decided to upgrade from that GP90 round to the Spitzer round, Spitzer meaning that it's pointed, and they developed this GP11. There are no real original 1896s left because they would all eventually get updated to the 1911 standards. So they came out in 1911 not only with the round, but with the Gewehr 1911 rifle. And that would be what you see in this configuration here. But what they also did is they took the older 1896 and they converted them to the 1911, and thus you have the model 1896/11. These are, for all intents and purposes, the exact same as the Gewehr 1911. And I will show you how to tell the difference between an 1896 that was updated to the Gewehr 1911 and an original 1911. There are a few things, but just to keep in mind that this Gewehr Patron 1911 cannot be used in an 1889 model because that has rear locking lugs and it will not take the pressures, the much higher pressures that are generated in this GP11 round. So keep that in mind. So the Swiss developed the Gewehr 1911 with the front locking lugs that were also on the 1896, and they decided to convert all the existing model 1896 to that new Gewehr 1911. The 9611 is virtually the same as the Gewehr 1911. So let's go over the characteristics. It weighs about 9.9 pounds. It is fully 51 inches long. It has a 31-inch barrel, and it takes the 7.5 by 55 Swiss GP11 round. Some of the changes that they made from the 1896 model to the 1911 model: they changed the barrel from a 3-groove barrel to a 4-groove barrel. They changed to a 6-round magazine that almost flush. They got rid of the 12-round, and this is actually a detachable magazine, 6-round magazine, rather than that big 12-round, and it's fully detachable. They also modernized the sights, these rear sights. They put a blade in the front and a tangent in the rear. It's got a 300-meter zero. And they also added a pistol grip stock. So the original 1896 had a straight stock. Here, they added this little pistol grip because the Gewehr 1911 also has a pistol grip. So now let's show you the differences between how to tell if this is a 1911 or an 1896/11. So some real quick differences is, first of all, take a look at that pistol grip. So you can see, if you look closely at the pistol grip, it doesn't match the wood grain. They had to cut that out and add that pistol grip in there. On the 1911, you won't see that, this inletted pistol grip. So that's one tip-off that will tell you that this is a 96 converted to an 11. There's also on the bottom. Remember, on the 1896, it originally had that 12-round magazine with that big magazine cut off on the side. So when they did that, they had to make a bigger plate to cover up where that old magazine cutoff used to be. So the magazine plate is a little bit different. On the 1911, you'll see equal on both sides. And also the buttstock in the 96 is curved. In the 1911, that buttstock would be completely straight. Now, it is possible that in 1896, 11 converted could get a stock that's a 1911, because if the stock, something were to happen and they were going to put a new stock, they wouldn't take an old 1896 and do the conversions. They would just take a new 1911 stock. So the best way to tell is to check that serial number, and serial numbers were consecutive, starting with the original Schmidt-Rubin for however many they made, and then they made certain ones that were 1896, and there's a serial number range for that. And then the 1911s have their own serial number. So if you read the serial number, you can match it to what the gun was originally made from. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to stop. We're going to show you the bolt disassembly and reassembly, and then we're going to talk about its usage by the switch. So hang out with me for just a moment while I change the camera angle, and we'll take a look at this bolt and how we take it apart and put it back together. Not a whole lot different than the 89. Be right back. Okay, welcome back everybody. We're going to do the bolt now, but before we do that, I'm going to show you a couple things of how some of the things on here work. First, the magazine is completely detachable, and that's not to load it that way. That's for cleaning purposes. I'll show you what they use to load it here in a second. So the big key here, this big loop, as I explained in the 1889 version, this is the safety. And the reason they did this is because Switzerland's covered with the Alps. It has, I think, 3/4 of the country has mountains, which gets very cold when you're up there guarding your border in the mountains. So they wear big, thick gloves. And this made the safety very easy to turn on and turn off. So let me show you how that works. Obviously, you have to cock it. I've removed the bolt or the magazine so it can go in and out very easily here. So this is the cock position. You can tell because it has the key is sitting way out. So in order to put it on safety, you just have to take the key, you pull it out, you twist it up to the horizontal position and move it in. And now when it's in, it doesn't work. The bolt is locked, the trigger doesn't work. And when you want to put it back on fire, you pull it out, turn it back to the horizontal, and there you go. Now you're back in the fire position, and we can pull the trigger, and that's how it works. So let me take the bolt out. Remember to take the bolt out, we have that same bolt release on this side. All you have to do is pull it down, and the bolt comes right out. So let me show you how this thing is loaded really quick. We'll put the magazine back in. We have the bolt out, so we'll be safe. And let me put the so that you can see it. And these are the chargers that they came up with, and they're kind of just cardboard and waxed, and it holds 6 rounds. The magazine is detachable, but they were meant to be loaded like this. So the way it was meant to be done is you just take the charger, put it in at the top of the receiver, and then push down. And that's how they were meant to be loaded, and they would carry their GP11 rounds inside of this. So let's go ahead and take the magazine out. You can see how easy that loads in there. Now let's take care of showing the bolt. This is very similar to the bolt of the 1889, except we have our locking lugs on top. We see we have our key, we have our safe position here, and our locked or our fire position here on the underside. So right now it's a vertical, so it's in the fire position, which is puts the sear in this one. If we put the sear over here, it would be in the safe position. So in order to take it apart, right now this operating rod here is sitting between the firing pin, which has tension with the firing pin spring, and the bottom of this cam right here. So in order to do this, we need to take that tension off. So we take our key here, and we're going to move it over here to the middle section so it's not in either of these. And once we do that, that removes the tension. And once we remove the tension, we can then take the operating rod by camming it, and then the operating rod will come out and come off very simply. So you see we have these rails back here that this part goes into, and then kind of the hole, we have the bolt and the bolt sleeve. So from there, we just take we unscrew it, then we can take the bolt sleeve out, and we have the bolt body. We can also take the extractor off, but I'm not going to do so because it's kind of tough. You have to push up on the back and twist it like that to get it off, and it's a pretty tough thing. So now, in order to take the firing pin, we have our firing pin piece here, we have to release the tension on the firing pin spring. So to do so, we have it in the middle. You're going to take it and put it into the fire. Sorry, over in the fire position right now. That was the safe position. There we go. Over on the fire position side, we can pull down on the spring. Our firing pin comes off. And we have our key here on the bottom. So you can see how the firing pin goes in and off of that key. So that's a very simple bolt disassembly. When we're putting it back together, we need to, of course, be careful that we put our locking lugs in the correct position. So to put it back together, it's just the reverse. So we know that the long one here is fire and that this one is safe. So we're going to put it into the key, into the firing one. We set it on something solid. We put our firing pin spring. We're going to compress it a little so that we can put our firing pin on top and then release that. Now we're going to put tension on this by putting it back, pulling it out of the firing, the sear out of the firing, and put it back in the middle between these two. So just pull it out. And now we have it compressed, and we can put the rest of it back together. So we know that when we do this, we have to have locking lugs now go up here. We put it on like this, it's not going to work. It has to go with the locking lugs towards the top now. And we're going to put what looks like our syringe, but that's actually our bolt portion, and put it in, screw it back in. And so now we're going to match up these rails down here with the top. And what we have to do is get our operating rod in here and then cam it down so that it's down here, and then we release the tension, and that's how it's going to work. So we start by putting this up here. We put our, so now it's cammed in there. It's all the way on the bottom. We have to hold it very tightly while we put this back into the firing position. And when we do that, that puts tension back on this and will hold the operating rod. And that's a simple bolt disassembly and reassembly. And then we'll put it back into the gun. Our function check, we'll start by putting it on safe. Doesn't work. Bolt is locked in. Put it back on fire by turning it back to vertical. Of course, we have our magazine over here, so we know that it's not loaded. And then we can pull the trigger, and it is functioning and it works. So that, everyone, is the 9611. Now, the Swiss Army would use these converted 9611s, the newly made Gewehr 1911s, and they would also make a carbine version called a K11, a K1911. K is carabiner, meaning carbine version. I do not have one of those. And since I have a 9611, I did not feel the need to get an original Gewehr 1911 because I already have the conversion, and they are, for all intents and purposes, the same exact firearm. So that is it on the Schmidt-Rubin 1896/11, along with the Gewehr Patron 1911 rounds. Now, these would serve for a very, very long time, for many, many years, but there would be one more upgrade that the Swiss would do to their straight pull rifles, and it would be a very significant change and upgrade that would begin in 1931. That is the subject of our next video and our final video in the Protectors of Neutrality series, and that one will be about the Swiss K31 that was adopted in 1931 and is a significant upgrade and change to what you see here. And that's going to be on our next video. Hey, thanks for coming and hanging out with me today and learning about the Schmidt-Rubin 1896/11 and the GP11 round. I appreciate you coming out and hanging out with me. And if you watched all the way to the end of the video, thank you very much. Make sure you hit that like button. It really helps with the algorithm. And if you like this content, subscribe, leave a comment or a question if you have one, and I'll be sure to respond. Thanks for hanging out with me today. We'll see you in the next video. You have a great rest of your day or rest of your week, whatever the case may be. Bye-bye, everyone.